Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The 2020 census. Is this something you should care about? And should there be a citizenship question on the census? Would you be surprised, Lance, if I told you that the census will affect your day-to-day life for the next decade? Well, it will. That's the reality, folks. It will affect not only Lance's life, but all of yours as well. And that's precisely why you should care, because if you're listening to this episode and you live in the United States, I guess I should put that in there. If you're one of our international listeners, well, I guess it probably doesn't matter very much to you. But for all of our domestic audience, it is inevitably going to change your life for the next decade. Of course, what we're going to do today is break it down, tell you a little bit about what exactly does the census do for us? Why do we spend these millions upon millions of dollars conducting the census? And what about this citizenship question that was withdrawn from the census? Should there be one? Is there real merit to this? That's what we're going to look at today. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on the census and all things that affect Americans' everyday lives without
TrueChat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Hey, I'm just excited that you gave me 10 more years.
Yeah?
Yeah, because you said it was going to affect me
for the next 10 years.
For the next 10 years.
That means you're required to stick around.
I appreciate that. I didn't know you had that power, but it's greatly appreciated. So
bestowed. Oh, by the way, we haven't heard the audience hasn't heard your official thoughts about your new introduction.
I don't like the voice as well as I like the other voice.
It's the same guy.
The words I know, but he reads it differently.
Oh, okay.
You know, he's much more stoic, but he sounds a lot more like me. So I guess that's good.
Yeah.
But it's not me, folks, even though I do voice.
Not you.
I am available for voiceovers if you want to hire me.
You are a paid voice talent, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Yeah. I bet people didn't know that.
No, and not from here.
That's right.
No, I don't make any money doing this.
Yeah, no.
I got to have side jobs.
That's right. He does it for outside people. He's big time voice talent. So Lance, the census, right? This is one of those things. It's not super sexy, right? I mean, to a lot of people,
the senseless,
right? Yeah, the senseless, as it may.
I stole that from a comedian, so just
okay.
Yeah, that's what.
It's not an original.
That's not original.
Okay, that's pretty good.
I don't want anybody to sue us.
So I do think it's important that people understand what I said in the opening is absolutely the case, right? I mean, this survey, poll, whatever you'd like to call it, this census that we conduct every 10 years. Is not only a huge undertaking for the government, but it affects our producer's life, your life, my life, and again, probably pretty much everybody listening to this in so many different ways. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that, because you say the census and it's like, oh, that thing we have to do every 10 years where we answer a bunch of questions and tell the government things we didn't want to tell them. Yeah, that it's mostly known that way. But for example, let's talk a little bit, Lance, about, how it works in regards to your representation, right? This is, I think, one of the biggest things, is that this count that we do is how then congressional districts are drawn, and that's how they will stay for the next 10 years, for the next decade, until the 2030 census is completed and we have a new count. So that's a huge reason this is important. And understanding that count, right, includes everybody that's counted. So it's not necessarily people who can vote. In fact, it includes a lot of people who can't vote, like children, right? Mm-hmm. Who are U.S. citizens, children who are not U.S. citizens, other people who are not U.S. citizens, legal and otherwise, right? So it includes, ideally, everybody that lives in a given area. If you're a human being and you're consuming air, then you're supposed to be counted.
We try to count you as much as possible.
And it's actually required by the Constitution, right? Mm-hmm. So, and why did the framers think that was important, Lance? I mean, you know, it seems like one of those things, you look at all the things that are part of the Constitution, and then you get to the census, and it's like, what's this doing here?
Well, they had to because of the way they set up the representative government. If you're going to have a House of Representatives in a democracy, you need to know how many people they are representing, because that in turn will then establish what it takes to get a representative.
So just so people understand, right? The Senate doesn't matter.
Right.
Irrelevant.
Everybody got 2.
Right.
Everybody
gets 2.
Right. Whether you have 5 people living in your state or 500 million, you would get 2 as long as the Constitution stays the same.
Our bicameral House situation.
Right. But we don't have a state that has 5, nor do we have one that has 500 million. But if we ever do,
right,
they still get 2 senators.
Well, but we've talked a lot about
2 of those 5 people get to go to the U.S. Senate, and 1 will get to go to the U.S. House of Representatives. 1 will be the mayor, and then I don't know what the other one will do.
Governor.
There we go. All right. Be the mayor of a city and then the governor. So everybody in that one state that has 5 people that I just
they'll all have a job.
They'll have a job. They'll have a 0 unemployment rate.
That's right. No unemployment.
They'll have no people to govern. But
that's right. Well, themselves. That's right. I mean, somebody has to, right? So,
but I mean, that would be an interesting scenario.
That would be.
Sorry, I guess I need to stay serious about this topic.
Well, but it's not that far from the truth,
punchy.
is it?
It's late.
But I mean, think about it.
What's that?
We do talk about some states like North Dakota versus states like California.
Right.
I mean, it's not quite that drastic, but it's not all that different either.
It's not too far.
And that's to say the House of Representatives, right? I mean, the original thinking was that this will be based on population. But part of what people have to understand too is the way we do it is we don't add representation, right? So it's this, and actually the article, it's a pretty good article. This was written before the Department of Justice made its decision to not put the citizenship question on the census. So just so everybody knows, but we'll go ahead and link it anyway. It's entitled The Effects of Asking a Citizenship Question. And because we're going to talk about that in the second segment, I think it's relevant. But one of the people quoted in here, Lance, basically explains the census doesn't change the size of the pie, right? So the total number of representatives isn't going to change. And this is really key.
The number's still 435.
Right.
No matter how many people are living here.
It's going to change who gets what slice.
Exactly.
And that's true in more than just representation. Mm-hmm. But I think part of the reason that people get that it's important is if we just added people, the effects would be more minute. The fact that they have to be reshuffled means that your state will lose more sizable amounts. If you lose something, you're going to lose more. And if you gain something, you're going to gain more as a result of the reshuffling, as opposed to just adding more to the system.
Exactly. But you also mentioned you're talking about representation, and I know where we're going to go here, but you also lose a bigger piece of federal dollars that will come into your state and into your city or neighborhood.
Can you explain that a little bit for people? Because they're thinking, wait a minute, what do you mean federal dollars? Federal dollars for what?
Well, there are, we pay taxes, mm-hmm. and then the government, even though it spends more than it takes in, which is another issue for another day, but that then allocates money to states for different programs, whether
that the state decides how to spend.
Exactly.
Or passes on to local governments.
Or block grants or whatever form they may take. For roads and food programs and educational programs. So the number of people that are in your state determines, again, what slice of those tax dollars you get. The more people you have, or the more the situation that you have that you're counting gets you more of your federal tax dollars back. And so that is part of the census as well, is that if you don't count everybody that's there, then you're cheating yourself out of federal money coming back into your city or state that can be spent on its citizens.
And that's a big,
so participate, right?
Right.
So when you get it in the mail, I mean, thousands of people are going to be hired to go door to door to clean up who doesn't send it back. But it also saves money if when you get it, you fill it out and send it back, because then, okay, you've been counted. Now the government doesn't have to try to figure out where to find you and do they still need to count you and all those kinds of things. So the more we participate as citizens in getting the count taken, the cheaper it is for all of us, because we're spending our own tax dollars to have ourselves counted.
Right.
So any way that we can speed up the process and get it done more quickly ends up saving us money.
Yeah.
And also then making sure we're counted can also bring more money into our city or state.
Don't be one of those people that puts it off or makes a census worker show up to your home, because that costs you money.
Right.
Literally. I mean, your money pays for you to be counted. So get yourself counted and get it over with. And don't be difficult about it. The other thing is, you said something, I think it's just important. You know, you said us as citizens, but even if you're not a citizen, and people immediately think, of course, of illegal immigrants that are here.
Right.
Immigrants that are here illegally, but
there are many legal immigrants that are here that are making our economy work
and are paying taxes.
And
so it behooves everybody who's here, including immigrants who are here illegally. It behooves them too. Why? Because most of them pay taxes. I mean, we've talked about that before. A lot of people here who aren't here illegally pay taxes. And why do they do that? Because some of the worst criminals in history were caught not for the heinous crimes they did, but for avoiding the IRS. The IRS will find you, and they will get their money. And if you want to do bad things, the one bad thing that you can't do is not pay taxes, because you won't get away with it.
That is correct.
And so I guess the point in all of that is, most people in this country pay taxes, right? They're obligated to pay taxes. So you're paying for this. You might as well speed it up and save what little dab you can. I think it's also important to note that when we talk about the pie, what type of pie are we talking about? Well, fiscal year 2018, the IRS collected nearly $3.5 trillion in tax revenue. What percentage of that do you get? That's literally what this determines. How good are your roads going to be? How efficient is your state government going to be? And what can your local city government do for you? Those are all things that come into play. We've got more to talk about. We're going to look at the citizenship question. Pro or con? We'll find out. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The 2020 census will be responsible for distributing more than $3.5 trillion in tax dollars, helping make the decision about what states get how much and what city governments get to spend their money on. All of this is determined by the census, who represents you in Congress, and more importantly, how much authority your state has in Congress. These things are determined by the census, and that's why when you bring up something about changing the census, whatever it is, okay? Yeah, we're going to talk about the citizenship question, but whenever you talk about changing what's on the census, this is something that has to be studied. It's something that has to be discussed, because we spend a lot of money, right, doing this thing. And it sure as heck makes sense to do it right and to do it as well as we can possibly do it, to make sure that we're getting as accurate a count as possible, because that's the whole freaking reason that we do it in the first place. So the Trump administration has proposed adding this in order to, quote unquote, better enforce the Voting Rights Act. Okay. Now we could debate, right, the motivation behind that and whether or not, how pure that is and why they're doing it. And for better or for worse, the reality is there's big political motivation behind all of this, right? If we take that out of it for just a second and we talk about the merits of adding the question, the biggest advantage in my eyes, Lance, of this, okay, is that you get more data on the vote, on the count that you're conducting. You have a better picture of just exactly how many non-citizens are in this country, legal and otherwise. And you have a clearer picture of exactly how many citizens are here. Now, what does that do for us? I mean, what's the value of that? And that, I guess, to me is where then I lose some of it would be interesting. I would like to know, just because I like to know things like that. And maybe there's some data scientists out there that could tell us why that would be, real valuable. I guess it would make some of our calculations about, Medicare, Social Security, those types of things somewhat more accurate, but I'm not sure that it would be
and
a noticeable enough improvement to outweigh the risks of adding the question.
Exactly. I'm okay with that, because obviously the more people we can count and the more exact count we can get, the better decisions we can make. And if that was where it started and stopped, I'd be okay with it. But what you're going to probably have, the counter argument here, is how many people will not will actively seek to not be counted because they're afraid of what the government might do to them, even if they're here legally. Who knows? I mean, we do know the government makes mistakes, right? I mean, even, doesn't matter what political persuasion they are, they make mistakes. And so now you're looking at a large number of people who might avoid being counted. And now then places that need the money are going to be underrepresented, which is why I'm not in favor of doing it, because I think it's politically motivated with the count. On the surface, it sounds wonderful. We're going to count everybody. We are going to make sure that everything is done legally and above board. But unfortunately, in this political climate that we live in now, those are almost code phrases and code words for other things that I just can't support. So I'm glad that there's not a citizenship question on the census. But I do think it is something that we will revisit a decade from now. And a decade after that, I think this has been brought up, and it is something that we will debate as a nation and may eventually get for maybe even different reasons than why it's wanted now by the people who are supporting it, because it has been brought up. But I'm not in favor for it on either side because I think it's too politically motivated.
Well, and that goes back to, I guess, my point from before about, yes, it would make the count more accurate, and yes, we would have more data. But again, if just say, right, that 3 million people don't get counted because we add that, because it makes them afraid to answer the census. If that happens, then was the benefit of knowing the data worth the fact that now we didn't get those people counted? I don't think so. I don't know. I mean, that's hard. That's probably a question for a real honest person who's been working at the Census Bureau for 30 years to answer, because I don't trust necessarily the director or, but you find one of those data scientists who's been working there for 30 years and you say, because maybe it is. And that's part of what I hate about how it's gotten so politicized, is if we could get an honest answer from some people who are real experts in this, who don't give a damn about the politics. Right. Because maybe the answer is, and maybe we're wrong, maybe not counting those 3 million people is
really a bad thing. It's hurting us more than it's helping us.
Right.
Yeah.
Or maybe vice versa.
But we can't get past, we none of us are trusting that it's an altruistic reasoning for doing it.
Yeah, because the people making the decisions about doing it are members of a political party, and their interest is in advancing their party, not. And this is, we're talking about obviously the Trump the Trump administration right now, but this goes for who's ever in charge.
It doesn't matter. I'm not right. It doesn't matter which political party. It's just that what's the motivation? And nobody's really answered the motivation in an apolitical way.
Right. And so this leads me to the next point, which I think is even more interesting, because I'm not sure that a lot of people, I don't know. I'm going to look at our producer and see if he knows. Did you know, and did you understand that the way that your representation for the state of Ohio is determined in Congress, is part of counting everybody? So in other words, it's not just people who can vote, right? It's not just people who are citizens. It's everybody who's here, legal or otherwise. They're all counted in determining how much you get, which from an Ohio standpoint means that we get screwed when states like California get counted, because they have a lot more people in their state than we do. And they have a lot more people than we do from our estimates, right? About how many people are here that aren't citizens. Again, legally or otherwise, they have more of those people. So does New York. So do places like Florida. So they all get more representation as Congress as a result. The question is, I don't think most people know that. Again, good or bad, I don't think most people have any idea that that's how that works.
You mean like more citizenship equals more representation, right?
Right. But I'm saying, did you know that people who aren't citizens are part of that count? Would it surprise you to learn that?
Yeah, that could be surprising. Okay.
I'm just curious because I've known it for so long that I don't really know if it's surprising, but I would see why a lot of people, I think that if we went down the street into Urbana, right, Lance, and asked a bunch of random people, who's counted for representation in Congress? Is it citizens or is it everybody?
And as I said, and I want everybody to listen very closely here, but this goes back to our founding document and our founding fathers in that we counted non-citizens in the first census. That was one of the biggest political deals to get the Constitution done when we talked about counting African Americans who weren't considered citizens, but
also weren't considered not exactly relevant to the count.
Right. Well, no, but they were partly counted.
That's what I mean.
Yes.
It was kind of, we don't
so
really care, but we also care because if we count you, then we get more authority.
We get more power. Right.
So is this,
so there's, to me, there's a little bit of, this is where that connection is that we need to count everyone because we've always tried to count everyone at least to some point, even though that was as bad as it was.
But
go ahead.
Let me flip this around. Cause to me, then you get into, well, then, I mean,
since they weren't counted as a full person,
right,
which they should have been.
Right. But 3/5.
But they were counted as only partial. You're going to make the argument that the people that are here illegally should only be counted as partial.
No, I think the in-between thing is, ludicrous.
It is. It was crazy. And again, that's what happens when politics gets involved.
But, yeah.
When politicians get involved, that's when it becomes really,
I guess,
how do you count 3/5 of a person?
I guess my point in this is because the historical perspective is really interesting because it makes you think about it in a different way. Counting more people benefits Democrats. I mean, just generally speaking, right? Hopefully nobody flies off the handle here. Counting less people benefits who? Republicans. Okay. This isn't a novel thing. This is how it's been for a long time.
Right. Everybody knows it.
I mean, that's, so they all mask it, under different things. The Democrats talk about, everybody, should be counted. And you want everybody to be counted because that benefits you, whether they're here legally or not. And that will increase your power in states like California, Florida, and New York, So your motivation is not pure.
Sure.
Which is
on either side. That's what I was talking about. When you get the politicians involved, nobody's got a pure heart in this debate.
And obviously Republicans want less people counted because typically immigrants, even if they're now citizens, right? Citizen immigrants are less likely to vote for Republicans, typically speaking, in the modern day. So, if we count less of these people, then our states, which typically tend to be rural and therefore are more red, they will have more power if we don't count those other people in, non-citizens in California, New York, et cetera. So we're going to continue this because I am torn on this one, and I'll try to explain it here in a second, but I haven't come up with where I'm at on this. So we'll see what Lance can provide us with. We've got more to come. We're going to finish answering this about, should it be everybody or should it be just citizens? And then we'll look at, where should the census head from here? We spent a lot of money on it. $15.6 billion is the estimate for 2020. $15.6 billion. That's a chunk of change there, Lance. So these questions are important. They affect you for the next decade. Keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Willer.
The 2020 census is now estimated to cost approximately $15.6 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B. $15.6 billion. We spend a heck of a lot of money counting people. And why, you might ask? Well, hopefully if you've listened to the first two segments of the show, you've figured that out by now. It's incredibly important because $15.6 billion sounds like a lot of money until you start throwing around $3.5 trillion. And then all of a sudden it doesn't sound like quite so much anymore. And in other words, we spend about $16 trillion or $16 billion to decide how to spend $3.5 trillion. So it seems like a lot. But
too many zeros for me with either one to wrap my head around it.
In the grand scheme of things.
Some huge numbers, right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about what's to come for the census. But before we do that, we have to finish where we left off the last segment, which is this. Lance told us a little bit about the history, right, of why we count. Why did we start counting people that are non-citizens? And well, a big part of that comes back to slavery and the South. And if they had not counted slaves, in other words, if we said only people that are citizens and slaves weren't citizens, then the South would have had substantially less power. So again, politically motivated, they said, well, we don't want to pretend like they're people. So we're not going to count them fully. We're going to count them part way. And that way we get more power in Congress. And we will represent these non-people in Congress, which is, again,
absurd. Right.
Totally bizarre. But that's how we get to where we are now, because again, once we got rid of slavery and we go through the whole process of, are these people now citizens? And then we're just going to count everybody, and everybody's going to get counted the same. If you're in this country, you're going to get counted. I guess the part of this that I struggle with, if you take that history component out of it, should people who will, probably will never be able to vote, is it important? If they can't participate in the process, right, then is it really reasonable to say that they're being represented by these people? I guess, are we just all are we making ourselves feel better? I guess is the point, by counting them as part of representation. We're representing them. No, we're not. They can't vote on it. So we're not representing them. We're just, I don't know. It feels like it's a token. So
would you only count people who are
a token
eligible
gesture
to vote? So you don't count anybody under the age of 18?
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's the question.
That's what I'm asking. Right. That's what I'm asking you, is because at first you said, well, they are, will probably never vote. Okay. Well, then people could argue, well, yeah, but if you're an American citizen, once you get to be 18, you're going to vote. No,
not necessarily.
The numbers show you're not going to. So now who do you want counted? So, I mean, that's why I was asking you that, is that sounds like you're saying that until you are of legal age and you voted, you shouldn't be counted? Do you only want to count voting Americans?
Well, keep in mind, I want to count.
Or do you want to count citizens who are 18 years of age who then are eligible to be voters?
I want to
even
count
if they don't vote.
Everybody. The question is.
And then do you count prisoners? If they can't be if their voting rights have been taken away from them from criminals?
These are all great questions.
Right.
I want to count.
I'm just throwing those out there.
I want to count every human, whether or not they are included in determining your representation in Congress. That's the question that I'm asking. So I think the census should count every person that has air in their lungs that is within the territory of the United States. So you would have a two-tier
citizenship.
Well, no, these people aren't citizens that we're talking about.
Well, the people under 18, the people that have committed crimes.
Well, I'd argue right now that the people
vote.
I'd argue that all those people right now are second-tier citizens, and not because of their lack of representation, but because the way we treat them. I mean, you can't vote. You're under 18, but you're a citizen.
Oh no! When I taught history class, I always told the teenagers sitting in front of me.
You wonder why I think that.
You are one of the least represented groups of people in our society. And they're like, what? I'm like, well, what politician is going to listen to you? I'm an old person. I'm going to go vote. You may go vote, but you're not going to vote in this election. So that's why they tend to do, they're like, well, that's not fair. We're citizens. I'm like, okay, fair or not, that's the way the system works. So, well, thank you. I'm glad you remembered something from class besides just, it was right before lunch and you had to go eat. So what is it? So what do you want out of this here?
Well, I guess
discussion.
I think it makes some
your
of us
typical struggle.
Yes.
You think there's a better way of doing this. You're not quite sure what it is, but something's got to be better than what we're doing.
It seems like at face value, right? That the people that we're supposedly sending to represent the citizens of the United States. I mean, that we're sending them there to do the people of the United States business. That's right. I mean, do we all agree that's why we supposedly are sending congressmen to Congress? Whether or not they do that's a whole other question. But supposedly the purpose is to send them there to act in the best interest of the people of the United States. And then that gets into, well, who's the people of the United States? And at face value, I'd say, well, that's the citizens of the United States, right? The people who can vote, who can run for office. Those are the people of the United States. And that's where the problem comes into play.
But you have all these people who, when you throw the word citizen in there, you're taking out who contribute to this country mightily.
Right.
Economically. You just said they pay taxes. They do all of these things. They do jobs. They fill jobs that we as Americans can't do, don't do, won't do, can't fill because there's not enough of us. I mean, we've done enough economics shows to see this. And so I really am leery when you throw the word citizen in there, because all of those people that you are breathing are contributing to society. Or, oh, wow. I mean, go ahead.
Well, and
say something, because I just like,
but my problem is, Lance, I think we've convinced ourselves, right, that by removing the 3/5 and saying we're just going to count everybody, that we've somehow made it better. And sure, maybe we've made it better, but I guess my point is, all these people you talk about contributing, they're not being represented, okay? It's just an illusion. We're just using them the way that we did before when they were, when we counted slaves.
I'm not being represented in my state. My state legislature is full of people that are passing legislation that I don't agree with. So I'm not being represented. So the Congress,
but there are
the Congress that we have,
there are people in the state legislature.
They're not representing me. They're not representing what I believe in and what I want to do. They're representing me, and I'm making air quotes, in name only, which is very similar to, I think, the argument that you're trying to make about the other people out there. That's just, I don't know.
My point is,
that seems a slippery slope to that.
You and me and other people that live in this district, right?
Yeah.
We made a decision. Now, you and I lost, right?
Right.
I mean, the person we wanted didn't get it, but we were part of that process. I guess my point is, these people don't even have that option. Okay. They don't have an option to really advocate for anybody because they can't go vote for that person. So they're getting counted. I guess my point is, I just have a problem with the thing because it feels like we've convinced ourselves this is really good, just count everybody and that's how we'll do it. But those people can't. I mean, if I'm a congressman, right, and somebody who's not a citizen from my district calls me up and is like, hey, I want to meet. It's like, yeah, but you can't vote. I mean, maybe I'm really good-hearted and
but the argument is, one is that eventually they may be able to vote and you don't want to get them upset with you. Secondly, you're there to represent all the people, not the voting people. You're there to represent all the people who live in your district. So you're supposed to not just make your decision based on who's going to go to the polls and vote. That's not what was in your job description. That's not what you signed on for.
So
and I understand I'm talking pie in the sky. I understand that how's this going to play back with the constituents at home? We see it in the impeachment trial as it's playing out before us. Different senators have different takes, not because they think it's right or wrong, but I have a tough reelection campaign coming up and I need to play the numbers. And so what's the best decision for me to make so that I can get reelected? Okay. I understand that's the way they play the game, but that's not the way it was set up. That's not what we intended it to be. And so do you change something just because the people that are running it now aren't doing it the way it was set up? That kind of becomes the question. And I mean, I'm throwing it back into your court.
Right. I don't know. I guess we could do
what do you do with that? Just because is the rule bad because the people who are playing the game right now aren't playing by that rule? So now we have to change the rule to meet the way the people are playing the rule? Or do we hold the people that are playing the game right now to a higher standard and make them do what we originally said you needed to do?
Well, but is it what we originally said? Because the people on the other side were arguing that we shouldn't, you can't have it both ways. You either count the slaves or you don't.
No, because they should have been. No, but here's where the other section of the history that you're missing. The other people are arguing that those people should be citizens.
And then therefore counted.
And therefore would have been counted.
But I guess my point is.
See, and that's a big, so you're kind of.
I'm not sure if the system was ever. I'm not sure that they really thought through this part of it because it's kind of like we all came to a compromise and then we moved on from there. And I don't know.
Sure. And it led to a war.
Right.
To decide who was going to be right and who was going to be wrong.
Yeah. And in the end, it ended up going the way that that it should have gone probably from the beginning, which is, these people should be citizens and should be counted as full people. I guess, I don't know. So
then shouldn't anybody who's living here be a citizen because they are contributing to the country?
Yeah.
Either as a consumer, as a worker, as a taxpayer, whether they're, quote, an official citizen or not, are they contributing to the entirety of the United States? And I think the answer is yes.
Well, sure they are. I think,
so
I
if
guess
they
to
are,
me,
they should be. So if they are, then they should be counted.
And if they're doing
I'm
all
trying to
that,
help you make a decision.
And if they're doing all that, then shouldn't they not be treated as second-class people? Forget the word citizen.
I agree. I don't have an argument there with you. Amen, brother.
I know,
Preach.
but that's I guess to me, it opens up this whole question about what does it mean to be a citizen and who should be a citizen? And we've talked a little bit about that before,
Yes.
and we don't have time to go into it today. I guess I just want to know if there's other people who understand why mentally this is a problem for me, because to me, it goes back to the who's a citizen, and whoever we decide citizens should be. And I'm not saying we got the right definition right now, but whoever we decide the citizens of these United States are, those are the people that should make these decisions, because that way everybody has a voice, a real voice, even if it doesn't end up your way, at least you were heard in some kind of official capacity.
Send your votes and explanations to truechat.org and Kara Justin and help him figure out how this is. And if you understand where he's coming from.
Contribute to our conversation. Hey, speaking of conversations, Lance, because that's what we did today, right?
We had a conversation. Today, pretty much.
What is you're back in the right seat today, so you don't have to pull out the sketchbook.
Right. I can read the sign.
You can tell everybody.
Signs.
What are we trying to accomplish on the
True
State of
Chat's
Us?
mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And since we always want to get more listeners, right?
Yes.
They got to find out you got to tell them how to get on this show and listen to us, right? And you can, and we also have, we're a syndicated radio show, but as a podcast, you can use Stitcher, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else fine podcasts are found. Tell your friends about us and let's get this show on the road, right? Let's get talking about this.
Lance, I think it's also important because I told listeners at the beginning of this segment, obviously not your fault, but we didn't end up with as much time at the end as I thought we might to talk a little bit about the future of the census. So I'll just say this. I think it's really important people understand, yes, we're projected to spend about $16 billion this year on the 2020 census, which is a lot of money. I mean, not to minimize that, but when we talk about the type of tax revenue in the trillions, I think it's critical that we look for ways to modernize and improve the census, because I'm sure there's money to be saved. But at the same time, it's so critical that we make sure that the census is conducted every year, or is conducted every 10 years, and that it's conducted as accurately as possible, because like we said, this determines all that funding. So let us know, thestateofus.org. There's a lot of different ways to listen, obviously, and you can find them all at thestateofus.org. Lance mentioned that this is a podcast, but it's also, right, a syndicated radio program.
That's correct.
And so that's why the website's such a valuable tool. It's going to make it easy for you to figure out where to go, and it also lets you interact with us. So if it's really important that we continue this conversation, you'll let us know, and we'll be sure to get it done at thestateofus.org. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch, as always, for doing an excellent job at making this show happen. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.